In looking at search engine optimization, or SEO, I'm often surprised by what a bad job so many sites do with it. Now, in one sense, that might be a little bit depressing, but that said, that presents a great opportunity for the companies that do well at it. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's actually more straightforward than most people think, and there are some ways of looking at it that can really make it simplified for you. And actually, we go deep into our SEO education here in the Academy, so I think there's lots of help that you can get. And if you're willing to do some work, we can help get you there. So, in looking at search engine optimization, let's start with a quiz. God damn you, PowerPoint. One sec. This was working a second. Okay, it is going to work. So, in looking at search engine optimization, let's start with a quiz. So, what is search engine optimization? Is it A, boring as hell, B, not really an actual marketing channel, or C, critically important? If you guessed all three, you'd be right. And I'm kind of joking about the boring part. Lots of people love doing it. I just happen to find it slightly boring personally. To be honest, I have a slightly short attention span, and it takes a long time for your SEO efforts to kick in. It's not like some of the other stuff where you can see results instantly, so I think that's where it loses me a little bit. But as I mentioned, it is critically important, so definitely you want to jump in there and get on it. So just to back up a little bit, previously, SEO really was kind of a dark art practiced by nerdy types in dark rooms. And in recent times, in recent years, Google has sorted out a lot of the trickery that's around search engine optimization. So basically, it's no longer something that you do as a channel, or we're going to do SEO to the site monthly. Like, it just doesn't really work that way anymore. These days, after an initial optimization of your site, which is critically important, but after that initial optimization, SEO is really more about building practices into your content marketing and following some really simple best practices. It's really not a lot about technical stuff, and it's much more about discipline and consistency and following those best practices. And as I mentioned in the intro, we do get quite deep into this in the Academy, so I think there'll be some good information for you if you are interested to keep going. One thing that's really interesting in looking at the high-level elements of SEO, I become disheartened in recent years just seeing sort of agency after agency just touting SEO and SEO best practices, and here's all these things that you've got to do, and sort of one size fits all, that here's this long list of best practices, everybody needs to do all these, when in reality it's a competitive environment and not everyone can win. So really we find it kind of important to focus kind of first on your baseline SEO, which everyone should do. And that's basically the one-off technical exercise with some ongoing updates, but essentially it's a project more than an ongoing thing that, again, everybody should do it. And then you get into some SEO best practices that if you are adding content to your site and out doing stuff online, that you should follow these SEO best practices and guidelines. And then kind of at that next level is the competitive SEO. And again, there are only so many spaces on the first page of Google, and whatever sort of SEO you're doing, there's a finite number of spaces. So if you're in an industry where there are huge companies that are competing and pouring tons of resources into it, you're probably never going to win. So in that case, making a monthly budget or assigning people to do chip away at this competitive SEO on a monthly basis, it's just a waste of time and money. So this is where also it's really important too to note that you can actually assess upfront just how competitive your market is and how likely you are to do well at it. So again, really as simple as that. I just hate the idea of advocating that everybody should do all this SEO work to be competitive. This first step, critically important, and we'll actually show you how to do it yourself later on in the academy. Make sure that you know where you stand compared to the competition, and make sure that you can win before bothering to even start. Looking at some of the critical baseline elements that I was talking about, as again, these foundational structural things that you need to have in place. You need to have a fast loading site and good technical SEO that we'll get deeper into. There's keyword research and page optimization that you need to do on your site. And then off your website, there are things like the Google business profile, having all your listings in order, all your citations, and then ideally having some sort of plan for getting at least some other sites to link to you. And in competitive SEO, that becomes a huge thing. In the baseline, it's not quite as important, but having other sites that think you're important enough to link to is always a good thing. Reviews are a critical element. And then, of course, analytics and reporting, just to have at least a sense of what's going on, is quite important. Having a quick look at under the hood at the competitive SEO, again, you're going to want to start with a competitor assessment and go from there. We're just creating the academy right now as I do this presentation, so the resource is just being built, but under our resources section, you'll find how to do a competitor assessment and be able to walk through that process yourself. And again, if you're in a competitive market, really the only path to success is to have a meaningful content and ideally thought leadership strategy where you're posting new content that people will love, that you can optimize, that people will link to, and basically driving that linking and engagement. If you can't commit to that, again, probably doesn't make sense to jump into the competitive SEO area. But again, we'll touch more on that, and it really, the level that you have to go to, it directly correlates to how competitive your own environment is. So thankfully, you'll be able to figure that out front and figure out just how deep you want to go. So we're also preparing some much more in-depth resources regarding baseline SEO and then delving into the competitive SEO. So I hope you join us for that. We'll see you on another lesson. Thanks.